Saskatchewan. Dr. Lalita Bharadwaj is committed to finding solutions and understanding issues associated with inequitable access, supply and provision of safe, sustainable drinking water supplies for First Nations, rural, and remote Saskatchewan communities. Through her community-based participatory research activities, she has provided learning opportunities for university and local students, facilitated interdisciplinary research collaborations, and helped build research capacity at the local and university level. Dr. Bharadwaj is a toxicologist at the University of Saskatchewan with expertise in human and environmental health risk assessment, including site assessments on brownfield sites impacted by creosote, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, and heavy metals. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lalita Bharadwaj.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to also acknowledge Treaty 1 and the original territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene, and the homeland of the Métis. I'd also like to thank the elder, Marlene Casius, who opened our conference with prayer, and also to the organizers who have given me the invitation to share my experience with First Nations communities to assess and look at the challenges and barriers to the access of safe drinking water within their communities. I would like to open my talk to describe my journey from the lab to the reserve. This has taken about a 33-year journey. My research started in a lab for about 20 years, and then for the last 15, I've been working with community members. I'd also like to express how community-engaged scholarship with First Nations communities has transformed my own research career, but has also transformed me as a person. And the way I view things, the way I act, and the way I appreciate Mother Earth. And I'd also like to share some of our results from the last 15 years of working with communities in Saskatchewan. And then I'd also like to end with a story for my friends from the Northwest Territories who depend upon the Slave River and Delta for their livelihoods, for their culture, and for their traditions. So looking back, when I thought about my life as a student, so I started my university career in 1994, or 84, that's like 33 years ago. Amazing. And I thought about my experience, and I was scared. I walked into the university campus, and I saw these huge buildings made of limestone, and they were almost a little bit Gothic to me. It was unfamiliar territory, and what I learned through my time in the classroom was that it seemed to be quite a one-way approach to teaching, where I sat in a classroom and listened. I didn't interact very much with my professors. I sat in classrooms with 350 other students, and I was afraid. I also learned that knowledge was generated from textbooks and from published research, and that to mobilize knowledge, I read textbooks, I read published research, identified gaps in that knowledge, and tried to write about it and answer questions to fulfill those gaps in knowledge. So that was kind of my idea of what academic life was supposed to be, particularly as a student. Okay, so in 1990, there was a movement in the academics to metamorphosize a way in which academics conduct research. However, in 1990, I just started my master's degree in pathology, and I was still in my siloed discipline. And I forgot to mention that the tower in the previous slide really represented that silo. and that there was only one way of viewing knowledge and gaining knowledge, and that was through that scientific approach. And I think that is depicted in this ivory tower, because I did feel isolated and siloed in that discipline. But in 1990, there was a movement, and Dr. Ernest Boyer wrote a book called Scholarship Reconsidered. And really, he was begging the academy to become more vigorous and involved in addressing some of the most pressing public issues in society. And he recognized that scholarship is not only about writing about knowledge and the gaps within published scientific literature, but it involved interrelated dimensions. And these dimensions are reflected in scholarship, teaching, and service to the community. It also involves connecting disciplines and understanding there are different ways of knowing. So scholarship is not about our disciplinary silos, it's about interconnecting those disciplines and how we can utilize the different world views and the way we view the world to better some and address some of those pressing civic and societal issues. It also involves application and teaching, and that transmitting knowledge is not just about writing and publishing in peer-reviewed journals, but it can transform into other modes of communication and mobilization. So for example, utilization of the arts, video, short pamphlets, things like that. At the same time, in 1993, Devon Masua was writing about and documenting some ethical guidelines on how to work with First Nations communities. And in 1993, that's when I started my PhD in toxicology. So really, from 90 to about 99, I was oblivious to these things that were going on, these movements. And Linda Toya Smith, in 1999, also wrote a book about decolonizing methodologies. And this was in response to the helicopter type approach to research, where researchers parachuted into communities, gathered information with little or no benefit to the communities in which they gathered that data. And I think one of the key points that I learned eventually after reading through these guidelines was that we need to frame research within the historical, political, social, and cultural perspectives of the communities in which we work. And also that there has to be some fair return to the communities and benefits and action related to those results. So, how did I get out of my silo and break out of my discipline and expand and transform my research? Well, it was by accident. So, in 2002, I started my academic career as an assistant professor in the College of Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan. And in between 1997, when I finished my PhD, and when I started as a faculty member, I had some kids, did some teaching at a massage therapy school, and got to experience life outside the academy, which was probably pretty good. So at the time, so in 2002, I was still in the lab, I was still working. I was looking at factors related to cardiovascular disease, and I was utilizing animal models and human cells. And again, I was stuck in my discipline and felt siloed and alone. However, when I was watching my son, our youngest son, Rowan, at a soccer game, I had the chance to meet a hydrogeologist. And he asked me if I was interested in working with First Nations communities. he was telling me about a project. They were looking at waste dumps in the communities, and they were looking at some aspects related to leaching of waste, leachate into groundwater and water. So I thought, okay, sure. So I thought, okay, maybe he'll contact me, maybe he won't. Well, sure enough, he contacted me. We're still friends to this day, and that's how I entered into the reserve. It was a project first looking at waste disposal in these communities. Okay, so what did I learn? Well, first of all, because it was new to me, I sat back, I listened, and learned from my community partners. I also listened and learned from the colleagues that I work with. And what I noted was that not all issues can be explained by experimental research. That was number one. Number two, that issues within the community need to be situated within the historical, social, political, and economic context of the problem. Third, that transmitting, transforming, and extending knowledge includes a community, and that it is seriously a community approach to solving the issues. It involves not only one expert, but multiple expertise, and that includes expertise from the community, from the youth to the elders, and from expertise from the academic units and disciplines that we have opportunity to work with. So these pictures just depict some of the people who were involved in the research, and it really emulates the fact that it is truly a team effort, and that knowledge can be mobilized through youth in our communities, through video, through interviews, through documentation and development of DVDs for educational curricula. Okay. Now, that project started in 2004, and in 2006, I had the opportunity to meet Elder Albert Marshall, who's a Mi'kmaq elder from Cape Breton, and also Cheryl Bartlett. And I was attending the Canadian Aboriginal Science Technology Society conference in 2006, and I learned about the two-eyed seeing approach. Has anyone heard about this approach before? Some of you? Okay. So the two-eyed seeing approach was applied in an integrative science program at the University of Cape Breton. And what it means is that to view the world with the strengths of an indigenous worldview and the strengths of a scientific worldview, and combining those and taking those contributions together to understand issues to benefit everyone who is dependent on the resources of our Mother Earth. And to understand that there are different ways to view the world, and that one is not dominant over the other. And this is an approach we utilized in the Northwest Territories, which I will share with you at the end of this presentation. And allowing the contributions from diverse worldviews can reshape and transform the nature of our research questions to answer them in ethically and culturally appropriate ways. And it allows for new complementary ways to observe, co-design, co-produce, and co-mobilize knowledge. So one of the key lessons I've learned through my work with First Nations community is to respect diversity and respect diversity of knowledge. The second big lesson I've learned is that it takes a team. You can't do it by yourself. You might be an expert, but you're not the only one. And for me, working with a diverse group of people allows you to meet your academic obligations, but also extend yourself through others to the community. And I think that's really important. And as a student, you have a little more freedom to work with communities because of your time schedule. But as an academic, an assistant professor or associate or full professor, you have obligations within the institution. So your time is a little less free. Okay. Now, this provides an example of how we need to work together. We did an asset mapping exercise with the community members of Yellow Quill First Nation in Saskatchewan. And you can see this in the picture above. And the community members, the traditional land owners, or traditional land users, sorry, the elders and youth, they pointed out the assets of the water, which is a Nut Lake. And they talked about the spiritual importance of some of the sites in relation to ceremony. They talked about access sites for gathering food, for gathering water, some pragmatic sites, such as for traveling and ice hauling, impacted sites as a result of decisions that were made outside of their control, and future sites of importance, such as the development of a walking trail. And you can see that to work together with the community to explore in more depth the perhaps impacts and assets from an historical perspective to a future perspective requires some work together with various disciplines. And I'm sorry, I don't want to give you a epileptic seizure or anything like that, but I just wanted to indicate that it takes a team and a diverse team. And this includes diversity within the community, but also in our academic environment. Okay. So for me, engaged scholarship really is about building relationships. And these relationships can be built through scholarship and the elements within scholarship. And that includes co-teaching, co-research, and the co-creation of knowledge for the action and benefits of communities. And it really is centered on transformative learning. And for me, building those relationships and maintaining those relationships has really transformed me, not just as a researcher and understanding my role and responsibility as a researcher, but as a person. And it has changed my behavior. And I think that is why community engaged scholarship is transformative. Okay. So now I want to talk about some practical tips when working with communities. So one, I think the big key is building relationships. How do you do that? Second is, how do you work together to co-develop goals and get on the same page? What are methods that are appropriate for the questions you seek together? And how are results meaningful and how can they use to benefit the community? And then I want to end with a project that we did in the Northwest Territories to really illustrate the transformative learning process within community engaged scholarship with First Nations communities. And this is really centered on co-teaching, co-learning, production, knowledge production, sorry, co-action and co-benefits. Okay. So when I started, and this was back in 2002, as an assistant professor and got involved into the waste disposal, looking at issues around waste disposal in communities, I got to meet a number of people from various communities, from various tribal councils, Saskatoon Tribal Council, the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, formerly the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations. And as a result of that connection and network, we developed an environmental group. And this environmental group was really only about 4 or 5 people at the time. But then over time, and because of our engagement and continuous communication and networking with people, it developed into a formal structure within the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. And as a result of that, our research program and the people involved in our program are welcomed to the meetings of the FSIN. And we share information so that information and project ideas are collaboratively generated through those network opportunities. And over time, we've had many workshops, we've had forums, we've had meetings in the community to really develop the goals. So what are some of the practical tips? Okay, so for one, I was talking to some students, and they said you need some traveling money, okay, to get to the community. So that needs to be in place. You need time, okay? You need to be yourself. People care about who you are before they care about what you do. So be yourself. If you're in it for the advancement of your career, you're in it for the wrong reasons, okay? And it truly is about developing relationships. Be able to listen. Be yourself. Don't come with judgment and opinion. Be willing to have some fun. Laugh. Be open-minded. Be patient, because as we heard yesterday, you know, sometimes things don't work out. You have a planned meeting and something happens and it's canceled. Okay, yes, it delays your academic process under the umbrella of the academic institution, but it can be all worked out. So just take it easy. Yeah. And really it's about walking together through the journey to address the questions of concern that you develop. Okay. Now I did wanted to mention research agreements. Now relationships, as we know, because we're all human, we're all involved in relationships somehow, in some way or another, whether that be your relationship with your mother or father, your grandfather, your sister, or a boyfriend, girlfriend, your husband or wife, or even your children. And I think we can have formal relationships with communities or informal relationships with communities. I've been really lucky, and most of the relationships that we've built have been informal. However, there are communities where there are a need for more formal arrangements, and these can be made through research agreements. And research agreements just outline the relationship. So what are the goals and objectives of the relationship? What are the roles and responsibilities of the partners? And what are the data requirements? What are the methodologies used to develop those or to gather that information? And how should that information be disseminated? So those are the clear sort of themes that are usually involved in a research agreement. Okay. So after many interactive opportunities through workshops, meeting with communities, there was the development of the Safe Drinking Water Program through the Federation of Saskatchewan, or Sovereign Indigenous Nations. And one of the goals that was co-created was to look at how the government is doing. Okay? So that came out of all of these networking events and meetings. So the main question for this particular part of work was, how is the government doing on its responsibility for Indigenous people in Canada? So what we did was we conducted an assessment of the strategies and how progress was measured by the government. And you can see that this occurred through a timeline from 2001 to 2013. And I won't get into the details because I'm looking at the time and I'm running out, so I better get going. But anyway, this is published Morrison et al. Okay, so what we did is we looked at the progress reports under the different strategies and tried to determine what sort of indicators the government utilized to measure success. And we found that there were only 4 indicators utilized by the government. And this was the success of the proportion of high and medium and low risk systems, the proportion of original 21 priority high risk systems that had been fixed, the proportion of systems with a certified level 1 operator. So this is how they measured their success with their programs. And we know that there's been multi-programs established and billions of dollars, et cetera. And then also the proportion of systems with a maintenance and management plan. Now we found that there were only 4 indicators used consistently over the 12 years. And these might be called indicators. However, the indicators were not culturally harmonized or developed through collaborative processes with actual community members. We then charted the data from our review of these reports. And what we found was that in relation to the priority systems, consultants who were part of and conducted an assessment and revised government funding or findings from the previous year. So you'll notice that, yes, there was an improvement in the number of high-risk systems, but when an independent consultant actually reviewed the information and did an assessment on their own, they found that, in fact, it was lower than what was originally reported by the government. Also, you can see that the training, technical training of operators did increase with the implementation of the circuit rider program, but trained operators are hard to keep. Okay, and I'll discuss some of the results in relation to that later. Also, you can see that the maintenance management plans increased, but there was a template introduced, but the maintenance management plans were not really assessed in the assessment. So the data is a little, or indicates that really progress has not been made, although there have been a number of strategies implemented over that time period. Okay, so under this program and through our networking with the Federation of Saskatchewan Nations, Sovereign Indigenous Nations, we developed a FSIN drinking water safety program. And we've been collecting information on boil water advisories over a longitudinal, utilizing a longitudinal approach, looking at some of the factors that are contributing to these boil water advisories, but also to the quality of the drinking water within 3-year segments. And what I'm going to present here is some information from 2006 and 2010. We have collected information from 2013, and 2016, but we're still in the process of going through that information. So you can see here that the primary reason for boil water advisories from 2015, 17, and 2010 did change. And the boil water advisories for First Nations in 2010 was mainly due to pressure issues in the plant, whereas previously it was related to plant chlorine and adequacy of disinfection. We now moved on to look at, one of the questions was, what are the differences between reserve and non-reserve communities of similar size? So communities of about 500 people who are non-First Nations and First Nations. And what we found in relation to long-term advisories, and these are lasting 5 weeks or more, we found that in First Nations communities, power outages was an issue. And this data comes from a period of over 2012 to 2016. Now again, we looked at water quality, so we looked at some of the aesthetic objectives, and through our work, we evaluated some of the aesthetic objectives, meaning color, taste, smell of the water, and feel of the water. And what we noted was that, you know, a good 50% of them were exceeding aesthetic objectives. The main aesthetic objective that we observed were total dissolved solids and manganese. And manganese can produce discoloration of water. Okay. We also looked at health parameters or maximum acceptable concentrations, and we also found that a good proportion of the systems exceeded those maximum allowable concentrations. And what we found was trihalomethanes was an issue, and it still is today. Okay. Now, as we proceeded, and based on sort of the evolution of our research results, we developed a program, got some funding through CIHR and SHRF and others, and we really developed a program based on 4 questions. And this was to look at the impacts of First Nations and water regulations on the health equity and promotion of health in these communities. And our guiding questions were primarily focused on what are the challenges to achieving effective regulation for First Nations water? How do these challenges impact the health of First Nations, individuals, families, and communities? What are the differences or similarities of challenges among Saskatchewan First Nations? And what are the processes and capacity needs around this? So we partnered with 9 communities in Saskatchewan and 1 in the Yukon. And we started to address some of the issues. We utilized a community-based approach. Water quality assessment was a key to this particular project, and, or ongoing program, really. And utilization of quantitative and qualitative data. And we conducted interviews, sharing circles, youth project, and as I mentioned before, community engaged scholarship with First Nations really involves the community. So it involves youth to the others. Okay, so what some of the findings? So we conducted 579 surveys within the 8 communities, and what we found is that a lot of the communities are dependent on groundwater, that 42% of the people who responded did not drink the water, rarely drank tap water, that 57% experienced a boil water advisory while living in their community. And we also found through our interviews that support some of the information from our surveys is that a high chlorine content was an issue for most participants who were interviewed, and that the water experienced an odor. Now, I just want to quote a couple quotes from some people who shared their stories and information. So the newest water treatment plant is, people don't drink that water, even though our water treatment plant personnel send water samples in, and it's supposed to be good drinking water. But I wouldn't drink it. It's discolored, and it's got like a smell. It's a newer system, but I don't think it's serving its purpose or its job to have access to clean drinking water. Now, in relation to these dry skin and rashes that were discussed among participants, so 40% of individuals indicated that. I know my grandchildren have problems with chlorination, maybe. The chlorine that they put in is sometimes too much sometimes. I know my grandchildren, they go back home and their skin breaks out in rash. We said that many times, but INAC insists it's the operators putting in too much chlorine. I don't know. Again, I wish I could know more about the system itself and how it operates, more or less. It's a good facility, but sometimes people do break out with skin rashes. So this is echoing some of the news reports that we see and some of the reports from the Assembly of First Nations. We also learned that cisterns and water supply systems other than distributed systems are an issue. And we learned that there are poor maintenance and continued delivery schedules are interrupted as a result of flooding of roads and infrastructure, that in fact cistern water supply is actually costly to the communities, and there are a lot of cisterns that have broken lids, improper installation, and lack cleaning environment or cleaning schedules. So as part of this because of this information, we then decided to assess the water supply system through the truck to cistern water supply. So we grabbed samples through the route and the supply system. And what we found is that in cisterns, there were drinking water parameters that exceeded the guidelines. Okay, and here's just a snapshot of what we found. We looked at unconditional associations between potential risk factors and presence of total coliform. And what we found was that there was a significantly higher risk of coliforms in trucks during late summer. So there's a seasonal effect. Significantly higher risk overall of coliforms in cistern-served houses that piped distribution taps. And then also significantly higher risk of coliforms in houses during late summer. We also did a structural assessment of cisterns, and we found that there were installation problems. A lot of them were cracked, they were concrete, the damaged lids and collars, and they were improperly located in relation to waste sewage or lagoons, and in relation to distance from other potential environmental contaminants. One of the quotes, and in support of identifying that we don't have enough water in our communities, I just wanted to share this one with you. Oh, I would love more water, because then I would be able to keep up with my laundry and the showers because we shower the kids every second day, and I'd love to shower them every day, but I can't, because I just don't have enough water to be using. And if they take a bath, then we will just add hot water. But they don't like doing that. I wouldn't want to bath in someone else's water. Okay, so meaningful results. So some of the results from this program have resulted in good things and action. And we've had wells remediated, decommissioned, and cisterns replaced as a result of some of the work that we've done. So in some of the communities, there has been some benefits. Now, the last thing I'd like to do is share with you some work from the Northwest Territories. We worked with some people, we worked with communities, 3 First Nations and 2 Métis communities, addressing cumulative effects as a result of industrial development and the impoundment of the Bennett Dam in BC in the Slave River watershed. Now, the Slave River is the largest transboundary river in the Northwest Territories. It draws its water from catchments in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. And people and the land, the people, and the animals who depend on this water are affected by the upstream impacts as a result of the impoundment of the Bennett Dam on the Peace River. So I'd like to share with you, and it really encapsulates how research can be transformed. So we worked with a 2-eyed seeing approach where we developed a cumulative effects monitoring program with the communities who depend on the Slave River and Slave River Delta. We developed indicators for cumulative effects utilizing traditional ecological knowledge as well as Western science indicators. We developed a framework for respectful and ethical research process. And we co-mobilized knowledge through development of a legacy monitoring program using a Bayesian belief network. We co-wrote and published our results with our community partners. And we also co-mobilized our information from traditional land users and elders about the historical impacts and the cumulative effects over time in the Slave River and Delta observed by the people who depend and live in this area. So what I'd like to do is is share with you their story from their voices. And really it's about community engaged scholarship with First Nations, really about collaboration, co-learning, co-design, co-production, and co-presentation. And it's a 14-minute video, and I'd like to share this with you because this is their story. Thank you.